Well, there we are, the Green Howards, amongst other forms of transport, bicycling up Gold Beach. Among them that day were Major David Stevenson and Company Sergeant Major Douglas Gray, old school friends from Bridlington, and at the time members of the Brid Battalion of the Green Howards. Well, first of all, what was all this about bicycles? Seems a strange way to get ashore on D-Day.
Well, this was, I think, originally so that they could get accelerated once they got onto the land. But actually, as it turned out, they became more of a handicap, and eventually they were dumped by the roadside because the soldiers had their arms to carry, and they found that they could get on a lot quicker.
But of course, you were very experienced troops. I mean, your battalion had been through the war together, so I mean, D-Day in a way was nothing new to you, was it?
Oh no, we'd done the Western Desert from Alamein, and then we'd done the invasion of Sicily, and really we were sort of a very combined unit, and I think originally when we were to do this landing we were to go on day 3, but I think the higher command later on said we'll change your mind 3 weeks beforehand, you'll be the spearhead, and so we went in.
But of course, Douglas, you're wearing what I think a Bridlington Grammar School blazer, and that's fairly appropriate because in fact you were almost recruited from school. In fact, you're old school friends, I think, weren't you?
Well, this is it, because in 1938 when the Munich crisis arose, it was one of the masters from the Bridlington Grammar School who was in charge of the territorials, and he thought it would be a good idea if all the old boys from the school joined the territorials and set the town an example. And I think that week 98 of us joined from the school, and hence the 7th Battalion Green Howards was eventually formed.
So, of course, you were getting it right by the time D-Day. In fact, you've been getting it right all through the war. By the time D-Day came, in fact, you advanced so quickly, didn't you, up the beaches, that you had to be held back. Now, why was that?
Well, we got in so far in front that the naval bombardment, one of our particular companies, C Company, was getting a plastering, and they had to ask the observer to hold the fire until they could lift the barrage a bit.
But you had problems getting ashore, hadn't you? You virtually came in through a minefield, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, well, actually, coming across the ship I was on, the LCT, which is a landing craft tank, and an MTB came racing up in the middle of the night and threw a weighted object onto the bridge, and I was stood there with Hank, I've forgotten his name, he was the American captain, and it said on it, so many degrees to starboard, you're in a minefield. And he bellowed back through the loud hailer to say that you'd have had more sense than throw a metallic object on board here with all the petrol and ammunition we're carrying. And a very educated naval voice said, sorry, old boy, but if you can get a spark out of a brass nut, you let me know. Good luck. And he wished off. But this captain was very good. He said that his ship was built in the Mississippi Valley. That's where he came from. And he said one successful trip pays for it. So tally-ho, and he ran us dry landings
right on the beach. Marvellous stories.
And that really was the reason why we got our vehicles off so quickly to join up with the forward troops.
Well, marvellous stories. Thank you both very much indeed. But of course, the Howards weren't the only Yorkshiremen involved. But of course, the Howards weren't the only Yorkshiremen involved. On June the 6th, the East Yorkshires had 2 assault battalions in Normandy. One was on Gold Beach 2, the other was on Sword Beach, and Major Reg Rutherford was there. In fact, not only were you there, I think you were virtually the first man ashore, weren't you?
Yes, there was two battalions doing the assault for 8th Brigade. My own battalion, the East Yorkshires, and on the right, the South Lancashire Regiment. 4 companies in the East Yorkshires, 2 in assault, 2 in reserve. My own company, B Company, on the extreme left, A Company on the extreme right of our part of the beach.
But you'd been told, I think, by the officers planning the landing that you could expect very high casualties. How high casualties did you expect? What did you say to your men?
Well, we didn't say anything to the men, but we expected around about 70% casualties. We were told that was the sort of thing. Morale was extremely good, and it was no point in lowering that morale at all.
But you lost, what, 2/3 of your men just getting across the beach?
Reaching the lee of the shore, I lost 2/3 of my men, yes.
Just cut down, were they, by machine gun posts?
Well, the point was, you see, we landed slap in the middle of the underwater obstacles. We were due to land behind them, actually. And, of course, that made things more difficult to control because the obstacles created a certain amount of confusion. The main point was, if we could get under the lee of the shore, we should be all right. One of the unfortunate things about it was, none of the weapons, with the exception of the Sten gun, fired after the initial landing, for the simple reason there was too much sand thrown up. And of course our problem was, we were short of firepower, and the only guns that really fired at that particular time to get under the lee of the cliff to fire was the Sten gun.
Can I ask you very quickly, later on, of course, you had a bridge named after you. How did that happen, named the Yorkshire Bridge? How did that happen?
That was due to a battle.
In the entire D-Day action, one man achieved the highest honour possible for a serving soldier. Company Sergeant Major Stanley Hollis, a Yorkshireman and a Green Howard, was awarded the Victoria Cross. His was the only VC won on D-Day. Years later, he went back to the scene of his gallantry to explain what happened to a group of soldiers from all over the world.
Now, I was leading the platoon along this alleyway, and I took a careful look round here, just as I am now. And straight away, a shot and a bullet hit here. Knocked this bit of corner off. Now, I got back pretty smartly. Stood a few seconds, had another look round, and I saw two dogs in the hedge, in the far hedge, and they were jumping up and down, wagging their tails, obviously very friendly with someone that was there. So I went out and told the company commander what I'd seen. I had seen, in fact, a field gun in that gap that you can see there. What size it was, I don't know. So I asked, or told the chaps, 7 or 8 of them, to dash out of here, across there, and start firing at that hedge, while I went down a patch of rhubarb that used to stretch, there's a little bit of it left there, from here right down to the end of this wire. I'd got a paint gun from the company, and I'd brought 2 Bren gunners up with me. These 7 or 8 chaps dashed across here to give me covering fire while I crawled through the rhubarb, and they were immediately killed down here, all of them.
Quite extraordinary. Well, Stanley Hollis crawled through the rhubarb patch to fire at the Germans who turned their field gun on him. He extricated himself from that problem only to discover that 2 of his Bren gunners hadn't come back, and he volunteered to rescue them. This is what his Victoria Cross citation said.
In full view of the enemy, who were continually firing at him, he went forward alone, using a Bren gun to distract their attention from the other men.
While he decoyed the enemy, his 2 comrades got back, and the citation also said,
Wherever fighting was heaviest, CSM Hollis appeared, and in the course of a magnificent day's work, he displayed the utmost gallantry. But in fact, he had 2 citations for his VC. He also rushed at a German pillbox under heavy machine gun fire. He threw in a grenade and took several prisoners. All in all, a very proud record indeed for his widow, Alice, who I'm delighted to say is here with us today. Although he's a very brave man, he could be very nonchalant about things like this. I gather when he got the message about his VC, he was more concerned with his winnings from the races, wasn't he?
Yes, I'm afraid he was. Counting it out on the top of the sandboard. So much for you, so much for the kids, so much for me.
And that was more important than hearing he got a VC?
Yes.
And also, though, I gather then that the local paper wanted to take a photograph of him for the local paper, but he was in the cinema and not too pleased about that.
No, because we promised to take the boy there, because he hadn't been home for lots of time. I mean, he wasn't home very much. And he wanted to take him to this picture. And, I mean, he said, I paid 1 and 6 for my seat and 9 for blind, and you'll have to wait till it's finished. And I'm afraid they did have to wait as well.
Quite right, too. Keep the journalists waiting. Now, listen, the other thing, of course, when you went to the palace to receive the medal, you left your hat in the taxi, and, of course, you had to be covered in the face of the Queen and the King. So what happened?
Well, when I got there, I sat down in the seat, and I just discovered I had to sit right in the front row. I didn't expect that. And I crouched down in the seat so nobody could see me. And then somebody came along and said, please cover your head. You must have a scarf. I had, but that wasn't the taxi as well. So he said, well, you have a handkerchief. Well, it wasn't a very nice one, but his mother, Sam's mother, had one with the lace frill round. So I put this on top of my head, you know, and I still sat down. And when the King came on the platform, he just looked down round the job. He stood up first, and then I had a quick look round again. And he saw me sitting there with this pretty lace on. And he burst out laughing, and I thought, well, if you can see the funny jokes, so can I.
Alice, it's a lovely story.
I sat up after, and yes, and I said, he seemed to talk a long time, the King, to Stan, and I said, his mother said, what were you talking about? He said, asking me, he wanted to know if you was at a new fashion.
New fashion. Alice, it's a lovely story. Thank you all very much indeed.
Well, that